Okay, so moving on to number 3, again, like huge topic, huge. It, rightfully so. I will not be able to give this topic the time that I want to today, as with every other topic, but it is very important to think about teaching consent. And I think we need to think about embed teaching consent in programs and in life. This is something that can be taught from like a really young age, right? By just modeling consent-based questions. That does not mean that kids get to decide all of the things that they do, and they can say no, and adults have to listen, right? Like health, safety, all these things. But we need to give people an opportunity where it's okay to say no and have that be respected. So that's my first little no is okay. No is not a bad word. Do not put no on extinction. So if a child says no, we need to find times where that can be honored, and we need to listen. Because if a child learns, same with body parts, that if they say no, particularly to an adult, and that's never met with reinforcement, they don't get out of the situation that they don't like, they don't get to choose something different. Doesn't mean that they get to go and do whatever they want, particularly if it's something that's unsafe. But if they never get reinforced for saying no, they can't say no when someone's doing something to them that they don't like, that might hurt them. So again, this is like a safety and abuse prevention strategy. So we need to be able to find times where it's okay to say no. I still do some work in like early autism support programming. And every child that I work with, when they start programming, there is a program in there that is reinforced no. It's not a program for the child, it's a program for the people that are helping that child to learn skills. You need to be ticking boxes, and I need to see that in the session, you are reinforcing when the child says no. If they say no, then you need to say, okay, let's pick something different. Maybe not every single time, maybe not when it's something like health and safety, right? Like, if they're going to run out onto the street, and this is something that Oswin talks about a lot in their workshops, you can stop the person from running out onto the street, but it doesn't mean that you have to then be constantly physically prompting them, right? So oh, well, I can't stop them, or she said in that presentation that you shouldn't stop, you have to respect when kids say no. Like if it's a health and safety issue, those are the times when it doesn't mean that we don't have to explain to the person why, right? So, and I think the second part, so we see the two people hugging, and one person in purple is seems to be really enjoying this interaction. The person in blue does not seem to be enjoying this interaction. And so this is sort of, and I feel like this is being talked about a little bit more, just generally, is working with kids about they can set up boundaries for their own body. So often I find we're protecting the feelings of the adult by forcing a child to do something that they don't want to do, right? So we have to hug so-and-so, we have to kiss so-and-so, we have to say, I love you so-and-so. But that might not be what that person wants to do, what they want to feel, and we're teaching them that they should do things that makes their body feel uncomfortable. And if we keep teaching kids that they should do things because an adult tells them to do something that makes their body feel uncomfortable, they're going to learn when somebody does something that makes my body feel uncomfortable, I just have to go along with it. I presented at ABAI this past weekend, and one of the co-presenters in my symposium, Dr. Robin Moyer, talked about some research that they'd done for their doctoral dissertation with people on the autism spectrum that showed that they were more likely to follow a lure for a sexual harassment or abuse lure if the person was a person of authority. So this is particularly important for parents, service providers, everybody to think about what are we doing in terms of teaching kids that they should go along with doing something that doesn't feel okay for their body, right? So we need to be modeling that as well. And so, it's tough not to be just touching, little kids' heads and moppy, hair and so cute, but just being more aware, more conscious of the message that sends. That sends the message, I don't ask when I touch somebody else's body, I just go ahead and touch it. And so if a kid is looking around, sort of like I was addressing the question earlier, and their rule at school is don't touch anybody, but everybody else at school is touching everybody else, then no wonder we're confused about rules. So we need to talk about the rules and why they're happening. This one is for service providers, but also for families and caregivers as well. But really thinking critically about the use of physical prompting in programming, and how we can remove or teach without physical prompting. And if physical prompting is absolutely necessary, in what ways can we do some harm reduction around that? Can we model that you should be asking somebody to touch them? So we're like, do you want my help? And maybe that child can't say yes or no, but can you attend to their body cues, right? So if they say like, can I help you? And the child extends their hand to you, then maybe like you can put your hand underneath their hand and move their hand to do, whatever, pointing, whatever they're doing, turning on the tap, those sorts of things. If the child's like recoiling, that's a no, right? This is consent. We need to teach people like that is that child removing their consent from that interaction. Do not force that child to be physically prompted when they've indicated no, because then this is where we get into like now people are misinterpreting cues about body autonomy and consent withdrawal in the world at large, because we've been taught that like I can't physically remove my consent, and we know that consent is like verbal, nonverbal, all of that. One thing with like toileting for sure is like lots of kids need help toileting, but can we at least do it where like the child's hand is the one touching their body? So we got like toilet paper, child's hand, adult's hand, right? So like that the child's hand is the one that's touching their body. That can also just help them learn the motor skill more easily. And then the last one in the corner here is like reducing or eliminating the use of escape extinction, particularly again for service providers in programming around like, especially with like leaving physical spaces, right? So the behavior analysts in the room will know that escape extinction might be, more technological than just thinking about somebody leaving a space. But we need to think about like how we're implementing that and what lessons we're again teaching students. If we say like, you want to leave a space, your body feels uncomfortable, but you're not allowed to leave. How can we teach some alternative skills that somebody could use to advocate for themselves? What else can they do? And so I think just like my general point here is like we need to address the kind of like culture of compliance that we have just like broadly, but certainly within autism supports. I think figuring out like and maybe even schools, right? Like we want people to just follow along. But what is this culture of compliance teaching? How do we teach people to advocate for themselves appropriately? Having a tantrum isn't necessarily going to be the best way to get your needs met, because other people are going to have a reaction to that on an emotional level. But what are we teaching in terms of this culture of compliance where kids should just do blindly what adults tell them to do, right? And we're going back to like this being like a health and safety concern. And so here's a quick activity example of how I will sometimes teach body parts and body boundaries.
This is a short model of one of the ways in one of the activities that I often will help to teach and assess what a student knows about the concept of consent and body boundaries. So one way that I will do it sometimes is I'll have two copies of the same outline, and it's a basic outline of a person, and there's a color-coded system at the top that most students are familiar with, kind of the stoplight, red, yellow, and green. So green means yes, people can touch you there, yellow means that you need to ask, and red means no. And so usually I'll do something like if there's a specific person or persons that the student is having a hard time respecting body boundaries with. So that might be like an education assistant or another staff member. That might be another specific student in the class that person is gravitating towards and is focusing their touch on, or it could be just like general classmates. For the purpose of this demonstration, let's just say we'll use an education assistant. So I'll usually, depending on the student's language level, sort of talk with them about like, okay, this picture is Landa. So that's me, I'm the education assistant. So we're gonna think about me and my body, and I'll write it on theirs as well. So this is also a picture of me at this point. And I will say like, okay, use the colors, and I want you to color where you think you, student, can touch me, Landa, your education assistant. And sometimes I might just get them to do that solo. and just get them to color and just sort of sit back and see what they do in terms of assessment. If I'm going to be actively teaching, I might say like, okay, let's go through the body parts. Like the places where you can touch me are my shoulders, and I'll get them to like actually like color the shoulders. Or you can touch my hands, so I'll color those green. It doesn't have to be perfect. And then I'll say the other places that you can touch me that you have to ask might be, like I might be okay with the student touching my arms, but only if they ask. And then really for the rest of it, for most people, in most situations, there would be like a no. If a student has something particular where there might be an exception, then you might want to color something else with a yellow to ask. But generally, most parts of people's bodies are going to be off limits. So we might teach it like that. Another way that I might do it is have, I have one and the student has one. So we'll say like, okay, this is Landa. Especially for assessment, I'll do it as kind of like a barrier. So, okay, I want you to draw and color parts of my body that it's okay for you, student, to touch me, where you need to ask and where you say no. And I'll do the same, and then we'll see if they're the same or different. And so I'll just set a barrier up in between us, and I'll get the student to color theirs, and I might color mine, and then we can do a comparison. And so what can often I see happening is like this might be what mine looks like, but I might see the student, if they don't have any help, just coloring like everything green. Some students might have a bit of an idea that they can't touch people's private parts, but otherwise they're saying like, it's fine for me to touch your body anywhere. And so then we can actually do sort of like a comparison of like, let's look like what's the same and what's different. What did you say about touching my head? You said yes. What did I say? I said no. Are those the same or are those different? And then we can kind of do a comparison and some extra teaching from there. So that's often like an interesting way to just see what the child understands about the body boundaries. Another way that I like to assess is particularly like the student. Okay, we're going to say that like this is you. So maybe this is the student, Ben. Okay, Ben, so this is you, and I want you to color on here, like, where am I allowed to touch you as your EA, or where is a teacher allowed to touch you, or where is another student allowed to touch you? So for this example, let's say, like, Ben has a couple friends in class. If he understands, like, the broad category, we might just say, like, classmates, or you might have to say something in particular, like maybe there's a student, Ahmed, and they're really close. Where is Ahmed allowed to touch you? And I'll just get the student again to say like, go ahead and color it and let me see. And it's often really interesting that the student will usually just say like, yeah, my friends can touch me anywhere, or my teacher can touch me anywhere. And they'll just like go ahead and color everything green. And then you kind of recognize that like, okay, they don't understand the body boundaries that they should have for themselves as well. And then that's where we need to reflect on like, what are we?
Okay, I'm going to skip over that next activity example. It's essentially just a consent of like ways people say yes and ways people say no. So I've got like ways people say yes, say no, and then I just like act out, or I have written down on a card like, and then say like, is that somebody saying yes or somebody saying no? And the person sorts them. If you're curious about that, you can reach out. But so that again, like the body boundaries thing is just like one way to teach a very complicated concept that may need to be gone over like a number of times. There's a variety of different ways that I've modified that activity, but it gives you an idea of the type of thing that could be used to teach some body boundary stuff. I know we had a question about that earlier. So